What's up, everybody? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast powered by Anajar and Levine. Tough weekend, tough week. Feel like we've been saying this every week for the last month or so, but we will talk to Mr. Perfect Javi Salas about where we go from here, what's to come in the season and after the season, and just big picture items on this Canes baseball season that's been a tough one. We will dive into the good, bad, and the ugly, mostly the ugly. But first, a word from some of the best friends that Canes baseball has.
This episode of the CanesInsight podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sala Astorita & Cox, a boutique law firm focusing on securities regulatory matters, broker-dealer and investment advisor regulation, white-collar criminal defense, complex commercial litigation, and securities arbitration and litigation. The firm aggressively represents clients throughout the nation. Contact them now at 561-989-9080 or visit them online at salalaw.com.
All right, we are here with Javi Salas. It feels like Groundhog Day. At least there's a win this week, but overall 1-3, not a great week. Talk to me, man. What's your takeaway from this week?
Yeah, D, I mean, it is another Groundhog, Day, Groundhog week. It's been a Groundhog season, I think, for the most part for the Canes, right? I think we've sat here several times and tried to, diagnose and problem solve on some of the issues that the Hurricanes baseball team is having. At this point, it just seems like the same issues just keep bubbling up to the surface, right? And the weeks keep repeating. We see a lot of the same patterns over and over again in these ACC series. I mean, and I've got a team that's 17-22 overall, 7-14 in the conference. We're entering some uncharted waters as a program. I think the standard has been set. We understand, we have a fan base, a team that is used to winning, accustomed to winning. We had one of the longest streaks in NCAA history for reaching a regional and having tremendous success, not only reaching regionals, but going to Omaha national championships. And it's just definitely been a tough year, I think, for everybody involved.
Now, you were there on the call for the Bethune-Cookman game. I mean, your professionalism and not falling asleep or getting up and walking away, I'll salute you. But just talking about that game, you saw it again, pitch for pitch. You were calling the game, and I know you're around. You were talking to people. Tell me your takeaway from that game in particular.
Look, it was obviously one of the more difficult games, I think, from a broadcasting standpoint, because I think we saw it wasn't a clean baseball game whatsoever. Miami, 10 walks as a pitching staff, 5 hit batters, playing against a Bethune team. And you never want to say it's a lighter opponent, but for all intents and purposes, it's a much lighter opponent than what the Hurricanes are facing in their ACC slate. So you didn't want to see that coming off of a sweep to Florida State. You thought there'd be a renewed focus, a renewed energy, come out and really just dominate the game from the first inning. And we just didn't see that. We didn't see that with this team. And they lost the game in one of the more helpless and hopeless ways I think you could ever imagine. I mentioned the walks and hit batters, but Bethune had 4 hits, 2 of them being infield variety. So they did nothing to earn those runs. Miami put them on base and they kept walking them. All the runs were either scored by walked in or hit by pitch. So it was one of those situations where I was in the booth and my partner, Glenn Geffner, and I were both watching the game. And Glenn's a baseball guy, been around the game a long time. He had never really seen a game transpire in that manner. And, just a really, tough effort all around. And credit to Bethune-Cookman. I said, I didn't give them enough credit. I said they didn't do anything to earn that victory. They did. They kind of let the Hurricanes pitch themselves out of the game. And it seemed like every arm that came out of the bullpen was just having trouble throwing strikes. And when they did get back into the game, they gave up the lead right away in the bottom of the 8th, the top of the 8th inning. So an effort that you don't want to see from a scuffling ball club, a team that, had come off a really tough weekend in Tallahassee. You thought it was an opportunity to kind of right the ship, and not necessarily right the ship to make a regional, but just right the ship for the character, to show some character, show some fight in the team. And just a tough weekend all around. And it sort of bled into that Louisville, series with the ACC play. Again, tough weekend.
Yeah, it sounds like one of my son's kid pitch games with the walks and the hit by pitch, but unfortunately it is a reality. You mentioned the Louisville series. Our buddy Ramiro Restrepo threw out the first pitch, the owner of the reigning Kentucky Derby champion horse. So we do have a champion. Shout out to Ramiro again for throwing out that pitch. But the series kind of went not that much different than what we've seen lately. First game, Gage Deal gives you a chance to win, 6 innings, 3 earned runs. Miles Cava comes in, 4 runs in 2/3 of an inning. You lose 9-5. Similar the next day, Rafe Schlesinger, 5 2/3, 3 earned runs, 7 Ks. Your 2 best relievers, Walters and Robert, give that one up, unfortunately. And then finally, again, on Sunday, the Bats come alive, 17-5 win. Cuvée hits a homer. Jimenez hits a homer. We see some of that youth. But really, it seems like more of the same in the ACC, and the only chance to turn it around would be that ACC tournament.
Yeah, look, and I think from comparing weekends, obviously a much better outing this weekend than Florida State, right? So if we're just looking on comparing both weekends, on Friday night, you had a chance to win the ball game. It's 4-4. Miles Cabo comes in, and unfortunately, the wheels kind of come off, gives up 4 runs, game gets out of reach. Miami ends up losing 9-5. On Saturday, you're in an extra inning ball game. It's tied into the 10th. Miami has opportunities to score in the bottom of the 10th inning. They get guys on first and second base, no outs. Jack Scanlon lines to the first baseman, doubled out. But it's just been one of those years for Miami where they just can't get the big base hit in those clutch situations, it feels like. And then on Sunday, we've been critical. I think fans have been tough on the team this year in particular, and they rightly should be. It's been one of those years. But Sunday was a nice effort. They come out and they run rule Louisville, a team that has been playing much better baseball. And it's one of those things where it's almost like it's too little, too late, right? The weekend had already passed us by. You lose the series. It is nice to come back and get into the win column. I think, we've been around the sport a long time. We've been watching Hurricanes for a long time. I've never seen a 10-game ACC skid like we had. And, those losing streaks are tough. Slumps are tough, especially for a team like this, a team that's a program that's accustomed to winning. So nice to see them get back into the win column. Again, the weekend had already passed us by. I think, there's 12 spots in the ACC tournament, D. So Miami currently sits at number 12 in the conference, 2 games ahead of Pitt and Notre Dame, which they do have Pitt in an upcoming series. So right now occupying that final spot in the 12-team ACC tournament, which again might be the only opportunity for the Canes to push themselves into the NCAA tournament and find themselves in a regional. If, they can get hot here at the end. Again, there's a lot of different ways to dice this up. We could be on here for hours trying to dissect the problems that they've had this season. Again, they sit at number 12. They have a chance to make the ACC tournament. You got to see some continued better play going through these next couple series.
Now, really the story to me, and we talked about this, of the season, 5-9 in state. Florida is not good this year.
Yeah.
Florida State is good, but a team that Miami handled last year, that number, and we got FAU coming up here. We'll talk about that game, but 5-9 in state, what does that mean to you?
It's unacceptable, I think. I think you asked Coach Arteaga, you asked the other coaches on that staff. I think they'll be the first to tell you that you can't lose games in state, right? Miami does play a very competitive non-conference slate. We talked about Florida. They came into town this year. Florida State obviously swept us, but it's been the midweek games that have given us a ton of trouble. It's the FAUs of the world. UCF gave us trouble. Florida Gulf Coast beat us. Bethune-Cookman obviously being the latest team to come into Coral Gables and kind of handle Miami. So from the standpoint of an in-state rival, you got to see the ball club, get up a little bit more for these games. These are important games, and people forget, like, the ACC, the conference is really tough. It's a really tough schedule. It's always going to be tough. It's always going to be competitive. But the bread and butter of making a regional and eventually hosting a regional is taking care of your business in the midweek. If you really look at all the top teams, whether it's in the ACC or the SEC, they beat up on each other. You see a lot of 500 records in the conference. You see a lot of teams that are, back and forth with each other, where teams, again, separate themselves as handling their midweek games, handling their business against more inferior opponents. And we just haven't seen the Canes do that this year. And these games matter from a rivalry perspective, in the sense that you don't ever want FAU or FIU to think that they're on par with Miami, and they go in there very confident to Mark Light Stadium thinking that they can beat them. And, Miami, yes, is down. They're going to take their lumps this year. And granted, you got to give credit to the teams that have come into Mark Light and beat them, but there has to be a renewed focus on winning these games, and not just winning, but handling your business and having a very business-like approach where, hey, we're going to play on this Wednesday night. It's not going to be a packed crowd. It's tough to get up for these games, but again, you're a college student. You got nothing to lose in these games. You got to go out and sort of take the bull by the horns. And, Miami's got a couple opportunities left in state to win some games. So I'd like to see that record better. Again, just one of the many issues that this team has had this year.
We know Miami's talent is not what it's been in the past. Are these teams getting better in terms of the talent gap, or is it an issue of just Miami coming down?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's a lot of parity in college baseball. You look across the board, and again, the midweek games are tough, D, because you come off a high of playing a Florida State in Tallahassee where there's 20,000 fans in the stands over a 3-game set. All of a sudden you come back down, you're playing Bethune-Cookman, who, again, no fault of their own, but it's not a Florida State. It's not a huge rivalry game. The the stands aren't as packed. I mean, it's a Tuesday night. Again, it's not an excuse, but it's a different level of game. And I think the solid ball clubs, the teams that do make it to Omaha, the teams that, push into super regionals, they understand that that game matters just as much as a Florida State, and you have to win and you have to play the same way. And I think when you see Miami getting back, it's when the standard is set that, hey, we're going to beat everybody and we're going to beat the brakes off of them, whether it's a Tuesday night, a Wednesday night, a Friday night in Tallahassee. That's the kind of Hurricane ball club that you want to see and start building towards. You don't want to see the ebbs and the flows that we've seen this year.
It's interesting because the talk was that portal would kill these kind of teams, right? Because their best players would go presumably to Miami, Florida, Florida State. You've seen that with Florida State getting some of the best players in the state, but it seems like Miami, Urso doesn't really play very much. It seems like Miami has not benefited. I guess you had a Brian Walters, who's a unique situation with the family ties, but you haven't really seen that benefit of plucking these guys. I know you've harped on this in the past, plucking these guys that are beating you. And really, the parity there should not be more parity. It should be less parity because of the portal, but it seems like it's not happening.
Yeah. And it's one of the great mysteries, right? Baseball is a sport where, again, I keep harping on development is not linear. So you see a lot of guys that perhaps in high school haven't necessarily hit puberty yet, haven't hit their stride physically compared to some other folks that are going to big Power 5 schools. So they do end up at a Group of 5 school, or perhaps it's a D2, D3, NAIA. There's good baseball played everywhere, and guys just develop at different times. I mean, you look at major league rosters, there's guys from all over the place. And it's not necessarily like football where it's really top heavy combined, condensed with the big top programs. You see, Alabama has 40 guys. Miami in its heyday had 40 guys in the NFL. Baseball is really spread out. There's junior college guys. So there's good baseball being played everywhere. I think at this point it's about, talent evaluation, talent acquisition. We got to use the portal to our advantage, kind of navigate where those guys are and get them on campus and say, you have an opportunity to be a Miami Hurricane, opportunity to be an impact guy right away. Miami's down this year. We know that, but I think there is the opportunity for Miami to come back really strong next year. Look, I said it last week, Link Jarrett laid the foundation for a turnaround, right? Florida State, again, ranked top 10 in the nation after last year being, one of the bottom tier ACC teams. So there is a precedent set. There's a way to do it. I think, the coaching staff and the powers that be need to sort of escalate that process and start really, bringing in that sort of that transfer portal talent.
Let's talk about the pitching staff, because it seems the number one reason why Miami has that record in state and the midweeks has been just the lack of depth in the pitching staff. What do you, aside from just getting more players, what do you see it needs to be the biggest difference between next year's pitching staff and this year's pitching staff?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think we're seeing it at the major league level too. Just with arm injuries, I think there's been such a focus on velocity and velocity training that I think, and look, I see it too at some of the high school levels, right? There's been less importance given to guys who can actually pitch and maneuver the strike zone and know how to navigate and get outs with lesser stuff. I think, you watch a major league game and the majority of guys are throwing 97 to 100 miles an hour, but there's the off chance that you see guys that are living at 92, 93, but know how to get outs. They move the ball in and out, up and down, and they can have success. So we've seen a long track record of guys come through Miami and become impact pitchers at the major league level. We see guys, you talk about Andy Suarez, Brian Garcia most recently, Andrew Walters, a guy who, we keep close tabs on with the Cleveland Guardians, who's probably going to be up this year. Carson Palmquist has had tremendous success at AA with the Colorado Rockies. So the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of guys push through into the major league level. It's just about getting those guys in the building, developing them, and then having, the ability to pitch and not necessarily be high velocity guys. I think Andrew Walters is a good example where he learned how to pitch at 93, 94, has a velocity jump. Now all of a sudden he's throwing 97 to 99 miles an hour, and he's untouchable because he knows how to manipulate the ball, change eye levels, pitch inside and out, and has a good breaking ball. So, you talk about pitch development, and I think the order of operations needs to be learn how to pitch, learn how to command the strike zone, and then have your velocity jump. And I think we're going in kind of reverse, where guys just want to throw really hard, kind of have no idea where the ball's going. And then, you walk into these arm injuries, you walk into where there's no command of the strike zone. We've seen a lot of that this year where there's just no understanding of how to get outs. There's 27 outs in a baseball game. You got to figure out, pick and choose your spots to attack hitters and go after guys. And I think we just haven't had a good sense of how to do that as a staff this year.
Just in terms of the playing style, the bunts have been we talked about them on prior podcasts as far as, you got guys that are capable of hitting big, that spot of the lineup, and then they're bunting in opportunities where, again, It's your fourth hitter, your fifth hitter. Do you see this as a philosophical thing that JD just believes in? Do you think it's a reflection of the talent or lack thereof? What do you think is the reason why it seems that for a team that it came out the gates, swinging for the fences in many respects, they're not playing the same way as you get into ACC play?
Yeah, and I think it's a two-pronged problem. This morning I was watching MLB Network and I heard Steve Phillips, a former Met executive, talking about how you build a contender in at the major league level, right? And he was like, pitching and defense always want to be your mainstays. And he was talking about, you always want to know that you're going to have a consistent outing from a starting pitcher. You know what you have in your bullpen, and then you're going to catch the ball and make clean outs every time you get the opportunity. Offense is the kind of thing that comes and goes with a lot of these teams, and you see it, right? We went into a slump in ACC play where all of a sudden, for the better part of 3 weeks, it seemed like we couldn't score runs. When you go back a month before that, we're scoring 12 runs a game, right? So I think philosophically, it's one of those things where the game kind of dictates how you want to play. And I think, especially recently, the Hurricanes have been in games that the offense hasn't busted out. We haven't seen the big home runs. The home run has kind of, come back down to earth. Daniel Cavey and Jason Torres have been slumping for the better part of the last couple of weekends. So they've had to get creative with manufacturing runs and scoring runs. Again, it's an ebb and flow of the season where I don't think Coach Artiaga's had the ability to say, this is what my team does exceptionally well, and been able to do that on a repeated, consistent basis. So I think that's led to, hey, how are we going to figure out to score a couple runs? How can we scratch one across? Do we need to steal a bag here? Do we need to bunt? You need to get creative just to get runs on the board and get some momentum in your dugout. So again, that'll come with getting some, new life in the program in terms of players, getting some guys who are more impact guys right away next year. It's all these things are they're trying to build an identity and they just don't have it yet.
As far as path to the tournament, is it just win the ACC tournament? What other path is there to the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I'm looking at the RPI as of today. I mean, we're 88 in Boyd's World, up to the date RPI, which pushes you out of that tournament field, right? I think that's sort of the barometer right now. Again, they go to Georgia Tech this weekend, excuse me. So it's an opportunity to, I think at this point there's no longer, hey, we need to win the series. You probably got to start sweeping some folks to get, some real recognition from the tournament committee. And then again, if you do get the automatic bid from the ACC tournament victory, that would be, another path to getting into a regional. Obviously not the easiest path that the Canes have chosen at this point in the season, being under 500, but that's not to say there is no hope. I mean, the percentages, if ESPN had that chart, it'd probably be on the lower end, but if you get hot, anything can happen. I think, unfortunately, we just haven't seen this team perform on a consistent basis. And, I'm sure if you ask JD's an honest guy, he'll tell you, like, there's consistency problems right now on the team. And I think there's a lot of question marks in that middle relief. The starting pitching has been good enough to win. The middle relief has sort of left this team in a no man's land where, the 6th, 7th, and 8th innings are super perilous. So, they're 12th in the ACT right now, D. There is a path. It's obviously not the easy road, not the smooth sailing road, but there is a way for them to sort of get back into the tournament field if they can get extremely scorching hot the next couple of weekends.
Well, Javi, I hope we have a new thing to talk about next week, because it's, we love doing it, but man, doing the same podcast is getting tough. So looking forward to talking about some good news next week, and I appreciate you joining us, man.
Thanks to you. Go Canes.
Go Canes.